welcome to Select Arcane. Last summer, you might remember that I went down to OBS in Ocala, Florida, and I stopped off at WEC, the International Equestrian Center. One thing I did not mention was that I stopped off at Mr. Pickles and Sailor Bear toy store on WEC's grounds. It's the ultimate Briar lover's dream, and even though I don't collect plastic, I had to get something. I had very limited room in my suitcase going home, so I picked up 2 Horse Surprise paint and play sets. These are those blank Briar stablemates that come with paint and a paintbrush that you can customize. I thought, well, if my Froggy stuff endorses it, how bad can it be? The blank horses that you can get are older Briar molds. These guys were around when I first started collecting, so it does feel a little bit nostalgic to go back to it. Opening up the first guy, I got the Rearing Horse. I've customized this one before once upon a time and made it a chestnut. And the second one that I opened is the Walking Stock Horse, which honestly is one of my favorite stablemate molds. I just think he's really cute. Each pack contains a flyer that shows some inspiration. Horses of different colors, different breeds, and things that you can customize your horse as. You also get 3 pots of paint, brown, black, and white, so it's very basic, and a little paintbrush. I decided that I'm going to paint the little stock horse because I've never done one before, and I've donated the Rearing Horse to Eric for his NaMoPaymo model. Now, these models hint that you can paint them right out of the pack and just slather some paint on and have a perfect horse, but this is not correct. All those oils from my fingers are going to affect the paint at the end of the day, and my goal is to actually make a really realistic looking horse only using these 3 paints. But I'm going to use my own brushes because I want a little bit more control. Just like any model, I start off with my diamond-coated file. As I file, you can see that I'm actually leaving scratch marks behind, but there's a reason for this, don't worry. I need to take off the big things like the Briar logo, the big plastic seams, and I really need a big tool for that. When I go over with some 180 grit sandpaper, those little scratches actually completely disappear. So first I started with my file that I got from Amazon, and then I sand over the entire horse. These seams are not easy to see, so I just do the best I can. After I think I'm happy with what I've produced, I take my pony over to the sink and wash with anti-grease dish soap. Scrubbing with a toothbrush, I get all that icky oil and dust off my pony. Leaving him to dry for a few hours until he's completely dry, I then take him out and spray him in gray Duplicolor sandable primer. I'm using gray because that's what I have on hand, and I want a different color that's not white so I can actually see what I'm doing. Three coats of primer later, and he's ready to paint. I'm going to be using this reference right here. I just found it on Google, and apparently it's from some auction website where this horse was for sale, and his name was Cowboy, so I'll just stick with that name for this model. Setting up my station, I noticed very quickly that I don't think the paints survived the trip from Florida back to Canada. I mean, it was last year, and these jars aren't exactly airtight, so that's really unfortunate, but it's okay. I can replace them with my own paints because I pretty much know what colors they are. I'm going to replace the brown with the burnt umber, black with some carbon black, and white with titanium white. All Golden brand. It's not good practice to use primer as a paint itself, so I go over the entire model with a base coat of gray. Yes, it's very difficult to see over the primer because it's virtually the same color, but trust me, it makes life so much easier later, and it will not affect the paint job at the end. I don't know what started going on here. I'm not sure if it was the craft paint from the black that was remaining, or if it's too much water. I don't know what happened, but essentially my acrylic paint started marbling on the horse. It's not going to affect the paint job at the end, but I just thought it was really weird. I start blocking in the basic colors and shapes. I can see Cowboy has some dark gray pants on and a few spots around his shoulders that are a lot darker. His face is very white, his muzzle is black, so I try to block in those key areas. Acrylics dry painfully fast, so I have to work very quickly, and this quote-unquote realistic paint job is going to be a little bit more stylistic. I'm just not really good with acrylics. Adding the lighter gray paint, I started blocking in those key lighter areas like the face and the actual dapples themselves. They look a little fish scaly, a little blobby, and he doesn't look anything like a realistic horse at this point. But that's okay, we're still only on layer 2, and at this point it's taken about half an hour to get to this point. I slowly build up the layers by cutting the paint with water. This does two things. One, I'm not building up thick layers of paint every single time, and secondly, it creates a wash to harmonize all the colors. Think of a Snapchat filter that takes you from one light source to another. The wash also feathers and blends out the opaque markings that I've already made. I'm trying to get rid of these fish scales, essentially. There's a lot of going back and forth from light to dark. By building up the contrast underneath, I take away the flatness of the acrylics. There are a few moments where it gets really weird, but then I try to bring it back. And I'm trying to use only these 3 paints. No oils, no pencils. Acrylics aren't translucent like oils, so I have to keep going back and forth, and here it gets really, really weird. But it eventually comes back. Up until this point, I've only been using one brush, a multimedia brush that appears too large for this little stablemate. This time I'm bringing out one of my old dried up brushes. It's very stiff and a little bit sad and not very good for model horses, but it's fabulous for dry brushing. Taking a page out of my oil textbook, I dip the dry brush into a little bit of paint and do a wash over the butt to put those pants back on. This creates the thinnest layer ever, and it's cut with water so it goes on thinly. You must be thinking, like, what are you doing? It looked so much better before when there was already light gray in there. Why are you going back and forth like this? Well, like I already mentioned, I'm trying to bring up the tone and the contrast. He might seem really dark right now, but that's actually part of the plan. At this point, I'm about an hour into the project. Going back in with smaller, more irregular dapples, I'm trying to bring up a little bit more realism. You may not be able to see it on the camera so well, but you can really see all those layers we put in at the very beginning, all peeking out of that darker layer paint. At this point, I'm also using a tissue to dab away the extra paint, creating a blurry halo effect. Adding in lighter tones, I bring that contrast back up. And you may not be able to notice this at this point, but I have been adding in a lot of brown to add a little bit more interest to the color, as well as to use up that little pot of paint. Greys aren't born grey, they're born a solid color, so my assumption is that this boy was born bay. At this point, the body's basically done. I've been holding his tail the whole time, so a little bit of the primer rubbed off, but that's not really a big deal because we're using acrylics. Acrylics are durable enough so long as there's a nice layer of sealer over top. I go into the tail, making sure that the top of the tail is darker and the tip of the tail is lighter. A lot of grays gray out in this fashion, including one of my fillies. At this point, we're about 2 hours in. I also gray out her mane a little bit so that the roots are more gray and the tips of the mane are darker. Moving over to the hooves, I start blocking them out. I can't use any pencils, so it's going to be a bit of a rough job. Same for the eyes. I don't have any blue in my pots, so it's going to be a rush job of brown, black, and white. And for some reason, I don't know why I can't get these eyeballs right. They're not even the smallest eyeballs I've ever worked on. But I get there eventually. I also add some final details like the streaks in the tail. And that means Cowboy is done. This is not my most elegant piece of art, it's not my most elegant paint job in the world, and is it really realistic? Well, no. Maybe it's more of a novice custom level. But saying that, the whole point of this exercise was just to have a little bit of fun and paint a stablemate. I've been working on a lot of assignments lately, and currently I'm procrastinating on an accounting assignment for my master's. So this was the best escape ever. Shout out to Breyer for these really cool painting kits, and check out Cowboy and Eric's pony side by side. This is the one he did for NamoPaymo. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram @SelectArcane or on Facebook by the same name. Thanks for watching. Bye!